All right. Well, good evening. I'm almost tempted to not use the mic, but I know it's better for our recording. How are you all tonight? Good. Thanks for joining us in person. We were afraid for a few minutes it would be just a couple people, so we're glad there's a nice little group that have joined us. My name is Dan Miller. I'm one of the post-secondary counselors here at Stevenson.
I'm Sarah Hanson, the other post-secondary counselor on the east side. Dan, do you want to step in just for the video?
Oh, sorry.
We'll wait
Hello.
till all of you on Zoom too, and then we're going to step off so you can see the
Yes.
slides better.
It's a little blinding actually right there. So I'm going to step over here. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this eve before spring break, beginning of the March Madness tournament. There's a lot going on in people's lives, so we appreciate you guys being here. Hopefully you are here for the purpose of our presentation, which is the junior class college career night for junior families night 2. So perhaps you joined us in person or on Zoom or watched it on demand back in November. Wow, time flies. A couple of housekeeping notes for the program. Obviously, we are recording it. So again, thank you for all those joining us virtually, or if you're watching us on demand. We will share the recording of this presentation with our slides tomorrow with our school's communications team. So stay tuned if you want to break out the popcorn over spring break and watch this on repeat. Maybe you don't in the next week or so. We'll hopefully it'll get published to the website tomorrow under the College Career Center junior page. We'll have the recording and the slides for you. Obviously, for people on Zoom, we're unable to respond if there's any Q&A types of situations, but we'll respond as a team and certainly get back to you later if you have other inquiries. And I think that's our main housekeeping notes. Okay, so we want to start with our philosophy of the evening and really our programming. We really truly view ourselves as educators who are looking to educate families in the post-secondary planning process. With that, it's kind of a partnership with you guys as students and with parents and guardians, with all of our students, but particularly with juniors who are kind of in the middle or getting into kind of the high-end busier time with post-secondary planning. We view this whole process as a journey. It sounds a little cliche, but we really view it as a learning process as for families where sometimes we're meeting with junior families now and they're starting that exploration and they're continuing their research. And over the course of the next year to 18 months or so, or really 15 months, hopefully the decisions will be made between now and then about what you guys as students and what your students for parents or guardians will want to do for after high school. We're here to support you in learning about that. And we hope that comes with learning about yourselves, what you like, what you don't like, your preferences, your characteristics that you're leaning more towards or away from, and hopefully developing those likes and dislikes along the way. We also hope you're thinking about what strengths and talents and special attributes you're bringing to the table, right? We always talk about what colleges deserve your potential application. And we kind of mean that. Like, what are you trying to showcase that is kind of making a college say, wow, we really value you and what you're bringing in your application potentially next year. We view this as a matching process. So we view this as finding a good fit between whatever interests you've got and whatever opportunities and programs exist at a certain college or a program, wherever it might be, whether it's 30 minutes away or 30 miles or across the country or even overseas. And our main goal as educators and as post-secondary counselors is to help you guys as families learn how to navigate the world of post-secondary planning, whether that's resources we'll share tonight or other resources you might be aware of, then you teach us. And we view this as a mutually beneficial, hopefully two-way street where we're working in partnership together.
Okay, just a brief reminder of who we are and which side that we work on, because we're a part of your students' bigger SST team. I'm Sarah Hanson, formerly Sarah English, so you might have worked with me with some of your older students, and I work with all the counselors on the east side, and Dan Miller works with all the counselors on the west side. Just a reminder, this is what we covered in November. So if this is the first part that you're joining us for and you're curious about the other part that we had done in November, we talked about discovering interest and options after high school, how to choose a college, how to build a list, and we gave you some homework. This QR code will take you right to our website where you can view that recording. So it's a great night, plus all the slides are on there too. And then this was an interactive worksheet that we used too. So we actually kind of gave you guys some time to kind of talk with your students and gave you some kind of discussion starters to have with your students as you were starting to talk about the college list. So tonight, we're going to kind of move on beyond that first night, and we're talking more kind of about how colleges choose your students. So we're going to talk about how colleges admit. We're going to cover admissions plans and application processes at a bigger level, which we'll go more in depth in even in August of next year, August of the next academic year, I should say. And then we'll talk about scholarships and financial aid again in kind of a more detailed level. We're going to talk again about how to build that list and where students should be as they're kind of moving toward the summer with their list. And then we're going to hit timeline, resources, and more family homework. So some schools use a formulaic admissions, and our students love applying to these type of schools because they know right away they're going to get in. Formulaic just means there's a transparent admissions process. Students meet a certain criteria, they're automatically admitted. Usually it's off of their GPA, maybe how many core courses they've taken, and it may include a test score, it may not. So in this slide, we just have a sample of Mizzou, which is really straightforward. You notice they do recalculate off of a core GPA. Core would be your English, your math, your science, your social studies, and your world language, and a certain test score. And if you hit that, then you're automatically admitted into Mizzou. Iowa and Northern Illinois also are two other schools that we would call formulaic, very straightforward admission. So in Northern Illinois, if you have a cumulative high school GPA of a 3.0 or higher, you are automatically admitted. Nothing more to it. For Iowa, they have a fun little RAI score. They call it a Regents score. And it's a fun little formula that if you go onto the website, students can put in their data and they can figure out if they hit the 255. If they hit the 255, they're automatically admitted to Iowa. Some majors are a little higher. They may ask for like a 265 or a 270. Those are all spelled out. But the formulaic ones are usually for schools that have lots of room to admit students. They have lots of space in their freshman class. And so it's straightforward in terms of the admissions pieces. The holistic admissions process is what you'll see most of our schools are using. Holistic is for the schools that are a little more selective, that they need to kind of review all of these different pieces to determine a fit with their school. The transcript is always the most important part. If you've done meetings with me, with your families, I always compare it to a marathon. It's 3 years of your work ethic. We're different than most other countries. The transcript outweighs testing in every situation. So I always tell my students, don't trade your day-to-day academics preparing for a test. We want to make sure your transcript is as solid as it can be right now. Testing may or may not be part of that process, and we'll go into more details on these. Your essays, your co-curricular activities, sometimes your major. Some majors can be more selective than others. Business, engineering, comp sci, nursing, those are more space-limited ones. Letters or rec we'll get into tonight too, and that's for some schools. Sometimes interest level may be part of it, and we used to call this demonstrating interest. I've talked to it more about having some points of contact prior to the application, whether that's a visit, whether that's a virtual information session, whether that's hopping on their website and spending some time there or opening emails and reading their emails. These are all points of contact. And then additional items might be part of the process too. Portfolios for maybe an art major, auditions for maybe music or acting. There may be some interview options, which we're noticing those are starting to go away a little bit more at the more selective schools.
So if there's one takeaway from the last slide, hopefully you got, maybe a couple takeaways, but my main takeaway from what Ms. Hanson just shared is the transcript is king or queen, I guess however you want to view it. Most important piece, right? So your academic record is really what tells colleges the best and most important data. So we're going to give you a little bit of like a little test, a little formative test here, a little practice. So we're going to look at student A and student B. These are obviously fake students, just the purposes of kind of illustrating this example. So let's first focus on the top. Hopefully you guys can all see that. Student A has a 3.37 weighted GPA. We're assuming kind of at the end of junior year. And student B has a 3.25 weighted GPA. So maybe at first glance you'd say, perhaps colleges are looking at the student A's GPA is higher, therefore it's more favorable for admission. It's a pretty good educated first sort of reaction, but perhaps the arrows are giving away kind of the big picture here. So if we look at student A, for example, on the left-hand side of the screen, they started their freshman year with a 3.54 solid AB average. They had a similar average in the 10th grade, 3.5 weighted GPA. So again, kind of a solid AB average. Then in junior year, their weighted GPA for junior year was a 3.08. So it went down a little bit, right? So let's just pause there for a second, look on the right-hand side. Student B kind of had a different experience where in ninth grade, they started with a 3.0 B average freshman year, respectable, solid GPA. Their grades went up a little bit in 10th grade to that 3.12, and then they increased to up to the 3.57 in 11th grade. And colleges, we believe, will probably actually look more favorable for student B because they have that upward grade trend. And that's really kind of a big part of the picture is as we do meetings with juniors, we talk about, hopefully without applying too much extra pressure and stress to you guys as students, but the end of the junior year really makes a big difference because if students perform well at kind of a similar area, if not if they're growing, which would be obviously ideal, that upward grade trend really shows for that student. And that's kind of what we wanted to show in this example. So we're talking about the purposes of the academic record and kind of the highlights of it. So again, most colleges will admit students just based on the first 6 semesters of high school. So the end of junior year is really kind of what some schools like University of Illinois or Band-Champaign, they strictly look at just the courses and grades through the end of junior year. The courses will always be on the transcript for your senior year, whatever you're gonna plan to take, but the grades may not be incorporated for an admission decision. They're primarily looking for a college prep curriculum, so that's largely 3 to 4 core classes in all those core academic subject areas. Ideally, we do require 4 years of English, of course, so that'll be required, but there's the expectation that students will complete 3 to 4 years of laboratory science, 3 to 4 years of math, 3 to 4 years of social studies. When it comes to world language, at least 2 years of the same language is expected by the vast majority of schools. The more selective an institution, the more they might expect or require more than 2 years, perhaps 3 or even 4 years or more of a world language. And some schools require some fine arts. There's really just a handful of schools, particularly on the West Coast, that are stricter on the fine arts requirement. So all the California public universities, so UCLA, UC San Diego, UC Berkeley, all those UC campuses require 1 year of the same fine art. So in other words, 2 fine arts that build on each other. So it would be like 2 in English, 2 in dance, theater, music, or art. And then the University of Washington in Seattle requires 1 semester of fine art. So those are stricter schools. We talked about Mizzou earlier. There are other schools throughout the country that have a fine arts requirement that they actually grant a deficiency if your state does not have a fine arts requirement for graduation, which our state does not. So they grant that deficiency, so students are still admissible to their state school without taking a fine arts course. In general, the core class grades are most important. So again, grades in your English, math, science, social studies, or world language courses. And as we're talking about in these slides, the trends and the grades are really important. So if you've had a semester where it didn't go as well, or a class subject where maybe you were looking to have more growth, looking for the next semester, that's something we pay attention to as counselors because that's what admissions as well does. They look at kind of those grade trends, particularly with what you might be interested in. Because if you say you're interested in a certain major, they're gonna look for related coursework that might feed into that major when you get to their college campus. And of course, as I sort of shared before, whatever senior year courses you're planning to take, especially as they relate to your interests, are important as well.
So let's talk about testing, which I know we hit a little bit at the first presentation, but all colleges who aren't test-free or test blind treat the ACT and SAT equally. So some of us who might have applied back in the day, like what I did, there was preferences between the schools. Now they're all treated equally. There isn't one preference over another. There are a handful of schools out there that are test-free. All the public schools in California, UCLA, UC Berkeley, UC San Diego, none of them will take testing. Even if you try to send it, they won't look at it as part of it. We are in an ever-changing landscape. I always joke in my meetings, and I joke, but it's true, and it happened to me already this year. Happened a lot to me last year. I'm only as good as the most recent emails I read before you walked into my office. And it happened again this year when Ohio State changed. I told a family, oh, Ohio State is test optional. And then they walked out the door, I read my email, and I'm like, oh, Ohio State just went back to requiring testing. So we're definitely in an ever-changing landscape. In the Midwest, currently, there's 2 that we know of that are requiring it for next year. It's going to be Purdue, who has been for a while. They use the phrase test expected, and Ohio State. Other than that, it's kind of like probably 40, maybe 50 schools total that are requiring testing at this point. They tend to be the publics in Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee. University of Texas, University of Miami just flipped this year. And then there's kind of a handful in the Ivy League. They're kind of split. MIT, Purdue, Ohio State, Caltech. I think I hit most of them that I can remember. We're kind of at that point where it's hard for me to memorize them all. But definitely checking and watching websites to see if they're making any changes. Colleges will always look at the best score, and we usually encourage our students, no matter kind of where they are, to maybe take one of these tests 2, maybe 3 times, and that's kind of the maximum benefit. Usually after that point, they're trading around scores, and that allows them to potentially super score for a school, which means they'll take their highest sub scores regardless of test sitting and push them together for a new composite. There are a few schools that require the entire testing history, only a few. I think Georgetown is one of them, and I think they require the entire testing history from both. Is that what you remember, Mr. Miller? And then Yale has moved to this test flexible policy, which requires all of the testing history of either ACT, SAT, or AP scores. And students can submit any one of those 3, but they have to do all of whatever they submit. And we do encourage you, as I kind of alluded earlier, testing is not meant to be a co-curricular activity. We don't want students spending endless amount of hours prepping and preparing for this. It really isn't what it's meant for. Again, that transcript is way more important, and kind of that maximum benefit we usually see right around that 3rd test. The writing component, which you'll see for the ACT, is not needed. No college will take it or use it for any purposes. Students, you do have to take it with us when you do the ACT in a few weeks. And we talked about the best advice. Now, for some of our families, we want to make sure that you're aware of the English proficiency exams. Some of our families that have moved here from other countries, some colleges will require the students to show English proficiency, meaning that they're ready to handle full-time English instruction at a college level. And that would be through the TOEFL or the IELTS or the Duolingo tests. Typically, colleges want students to be in an English-speaking country and an English-speaking school for 3 years, and then they won't have to do that English proficiency test. So if your student has moved here from another country in less than 3 years, so didn't start freshman year with us, more than likely they need to take one of these tests for admissions in addition to anything else they might be taking. ACT is changing. How many in my audience knew that? A couple. Okay. And it's been kind of a confusing year to explain this to our juniors, but some of you may be taking this new test and not even realize it. So let's start with our school day ACT that you're taking in April with us, the early April, is the old ACT. It's going to be digital. It's online, but it is the old ACT. English, math, writing, science, all 4 sections together make your composite. The science is full of graphs and charts, and we're throwing the writing in because the state wants to know that you can write. The new ACT, called the core ACT, is a shorter test. They're going to give you more time per question, so all the things that annoy our students about the ACT, they're changing. The science section is optional. We're still highly recommending it because colleges have not necessarily shared if they want it or not. The content of the science section is changing. There's going to be more content of the science and the concepts of it, and less of those charts and graphs that really tired students at the end of the test. When the new ACT is unveiled depends on the format that your student is taking it, and this is where it gets more confusing. So starting in April, the online or digital ACT on Saturdays will start with the new version. So if your student signed up for a Saturday ACT in April, they will get the new version. The same is true for June and July. The paper version does not move to the new version until September of their senior year. And that's just how they're unveiling it out. Now, we do know test sites are getting a little filled up. The online can be a little harder to find, and that's because schools have to issue the device that the student is taking the exam on. So if your student goes to Mundelein High School, Mundelein has to provide them a device. So we know resource-wise, this can tap out schools. But again, just a reminder that our school day April ACT is the old one. It's digital, but it's the old version with the writing test into it. These are the upcoming test dates. I tried to put in any of them that their students may still be able to take. So the ACT is on the left. where there is a June and July that is coming up. Those can be harder to find in the summer because our schools are just not equipped to proctor those. And then there'll be a September one and then a middle of October one, which I do believe they've moved up now to make it to where students should be able to take it and still have it timed for November 1st applications. The SAT, there is a May one that is being offered. Oh, my June one fell off. Where's my June one? Oh, no, it's on there. Sorry. A May 3rd, a June 7th, and then an August 23rd, a September 13th, and an October 4th. The asterisk ones are ones that we offer at Stevenson, but I can tell you just as of like about a week or two ago, we did fill up the June spot here. I looked online and did see there are a couple other area high schools that still have spots for the June one. Other than that, it gets a little harder to find. The fall exams are not open yet for registration and would be over the summer.
Okay. Some other ways that colleges admit students is through your writing and through writing in the application, so specifically essays. So we just wanted to take a minute to kind of go over the types of essay questions that will be potentially asked of you when you guys fill out applications next year. One of the more popular questions that comes up quite frequently by a lot of schools, it's of course individualized for each school, is sort of the famous why us question. In other words, asking like, why do you want to attend our school? It's not meant to be a trick question. They're really just looking to understand what research and homework have you done to understand our school, our program, the major you wanna look for to study at our school. They're really looking for genuine interest. Typically the more research one does, the more knowledge they have through the campus rep visit here at Stevenson, through visiting the actual campus, by getting to know the school, by talking to people about the opportunities, the better that one student can genuinely answer that question. It's really not meant to be a trick question. Similarly, but also a little bit different, is the why this major question. So schools also want to know, why do you want to study business? Why do you want to study biology? Why are you maybe even undecided? What are you kind of thinking about? Like, what are some of your interests? What have you enjoyed in high school? What are you gravitating more towards in college, even if you're not sure? So they're really looking for that exploration through your classes, through co-curriculars, through whatever involvement you've had in high school that might relate to those areas of study. The additional information is truly an optional essay question. So if you've had a personal situation in high school and you want to kind of talk about it in your application, it might be a class, grade, or a semester, or a year that maybe didn't go quite the way you were hoping it to go for personal reasons, or whatever the situation might be. I always tell students in my meetings, like, this is a chance to kind of talk about it a little bit, and they're usually looking to hear kind of like the facts of kind of like, tell us what happened during that specific time period, and kind of what did you learn from it? What are the reflections you kind of gained from that experience? So kind of a couple paragraphs on those reflections. If you've had an IEP or 504 in high school and you want to talk about how you've used accommodations, various supports inside or even outside the building, that could also be something to address, but this is totally an optional section for students to address. Then more selective schools tend to ask more of the analytical questions. These are supplemental essay questions in the application. These are kind of random and very open-ended and meant to get you to think, hopefully creatively, about a question that doesn't have a specific answer, right? We gave a few examples. What advice would a wisdom tooth have? Who's a significant person in your life? Which Ben and Jerry's ice cream flavor best describes you? Where is Waldo really? These sort of random questions that sort of make you sort of puzzled and maybe respond with, I don't know how I'm going to respond to that. And they do that intentionally. They really want to see how are you sort of creatively responding to these questions. Our general tip, and we have a lot of tips with essays, but our big tip for today, and what we always tell students, is the 1/3 to 2/3 rule. So what do we mean by that? What we mean by that is, let's say a supplemental question or a question in general has 600 words or 300 words, whatever that total length is, the maximum word count, well, only 1/3 of it should really be about the experience of the answer. So the person who influences you is a good example to kind of talk about. So maybe it's a grandparent or an aunt or a sibling or just a friend who's really made a big impact on your life. Only 1/3 of that response should be about that person, but then 2/3 of it should go back to you. How has that person influenced your growth, your experiences, your better understanding of the world, or whatever kind of influences they've had on your upbringing or your high school experiences? So that's sort of a general tip that colleges are looking for. It always comes back to you in terms of like, what are you sharing more about yourself? So there will be many colleges that will say this essay question is optional. It's it's a little bit of a test. They're trying to figure out, minus that additional information section that I just talked about in the previous slide, there will be optional essay questions and applications, and they're trying to sort of gauge, is a student really interested in our school? Our advice tends to be, well, if it's optional and you're really interested, you might want to answer that one. That might be a good way to sort of show that interest in that school, to show you're doing that homework, you're doing that due diligence. It sounds straightforward, but we encourage you to answer the prompt. A lot of students sometimes show us some of their drafts, and the answer doesn't really have anything to do with the prompt itself. So you want to make sure that answer itself reflects whatever they're actually asking you to talk about, whether it's the major or the campus or the school or more about the specific general analytical prompt. It should be the student's voice. And sometimes when essay answers get extra feedback from anybody, sometimes it doesn't really sound like them. And that's something sometimes how we coach students a little bit. Maybe this isn't sounding exactly like you or like a high school student. Maybe there's too many fancy words, or this isn't really the language you usually use when you talk to people or how you write. It should still sound like you as you kind of answer that prompt. Whatever the word count is, we always say quality is better than quantity. So just because they have a maximum word count doesn't mean you have to use every word allotted. It can easily be a very sufficient, great response with half the word count that they give you. As long as you're in that range that they provide, that's completely acceptable. This is a lengthy process. We have a really cool program here at Stevenson called the College Essay Workshop class. It's a 4-day workshop to kind of get the skills and really the toolbox that you guys have never really been taught as students, or your students have never been taught for you as parents here at Stevenson, to kind of how to write effective college essays. So the first 2 days are really geared towards giving you those skills in that toolbox. We give you a lot of good resources and examples of model essays, kind of how to think through your own ideas. We give you time to practice writing, and then you actually get feedback from your peers and your teacher in the class. It's offered 5 times this summer. Couple times in the evening. It's a good timing that we're doing this program tonight because the quote unquote deadline is actually tomorrow. So if you're interested, if this sounds appealing, couldn't recommend it more. It's a really cool experience for our rising seniors to get some experience about the college essays. And one of the other last pieces is just AI. AI can be a really helpful resource to get ideas, to kind of think through some thoughts, to sort of polish some writing. But we want it to be a resource and not the way you use the tool you use to answer your questions, right? If that's kind of your go-to source to kind of generate a response for an essay question, it's not going to work out well. Some schools do have AI policies about whether you can use it as a resource at all. So we encourage you to kind of explore, and they say it specifically on their website. We've seen that quite a few times. And I think schools are aware of it, of course. We all know that AI is out there, but we encourage you guys, as you have your list of schools, to kind of be cognizant of the schools that are strict about kind of enforcing AI use, and other schools that may actually promote it for the resources I'm sort of mentioning, to get ideas and to kind of help jumpstart some of your thinking. So shifting gears a little bit, another aspect of how colleges admit students is letters of recommendation. So we just wanted to briefly differentiate counselor versus teacher letters of recommendation. The counselor letter of recommendation is really meant to be like the big picture. What is your counselor saying about you in terms of your overall growth, or the time that they've worked with you as their for them as your counselor? They're going to be talking about your classes, your involvement in the community, kind of what your character is all about. There's something called the counselor brag sheet. That's a Google survey form that once you fill it out, the results actually get sent directly to your counselor. And almost always, I'm pretty certain that your counselor will want to meet with you to kind of go over it and kind of talk about it and hear, well, what should I be highlighting as your counselor within a potential counselor letter recommendation? The reality is that not all colleges require a counselor letter, only a certain number do. Many actually do not, because they don't need one, as Ms. Hanson shared earlier. If they're a formula-based admissions school, they're almost definitely not going to require a counselor letter. So before filling out that survey, you want to kind of check, do I actually need a letter of recommendation from my counselor, kind of giving that big picture overview of my high school experience. Same thing kind of goes with teachers. It's a little bit different. Teachers are really specific to your experiences with them in the class you learn from them in, and or if you're like also maybe in a club or a sport with that teacher. But they're really looking to get a snapshot of like, what does that look like in that academic experience? What do you like as a student? What has your writing been like? Your discussion, your contributions to the class environment? They're really just trying to get a sense of your academic contributions in that specific environment. There is a teacher reflection form that we also ask you guys to fill out once a teacher agrees to write a letter of recommendation for a student. We really encourage juniors to ask a junior year core teacher. So again, someone who's taught you in English, math, science, social studies, or world language. Anyone that isn't a core teacher is really considered a quote unquote other recommender, someone who's a non-core teacher, you know, in another subject area, or maybe an activity sponsor or a coach or a community member who you've worked with in some capacity, or an internship supervisor or job employer, that kind of thing. So again, we're talking about core teachers during the junior year. And again, just like the counselor letter, a lot of schools, especially public schools, don't necessarily require them, like University of Illinois or Urbana-Champaign will not accept letters of recommendation. So part of this process is students kind of doing their homework to ensure what schools actually require a letter. How many do they require? It'll usually be 1 or 2 teachers and maybe your counselor letter. It won't really exceed more than that. That's kind of the maximum you're going to see. And some other factors that could be related to the admissions process in terms of how colleges admit you or admit students in general. Again, as Ms. Hanson shared earlier, kind of demonstrating one's interest or kind of the contacts you might have with a college throughout the whole process. Whatever major you're choosing or majors, some schools allow you to select sometimes 2 or more majors on the application to sort of show and demonstrate interest across different areas of the curriculum. Whatever you've done outside of the school day. So whether it's clubs at school, community involvement, maybe some hobbies, it could be family responsibilities, it could be a job, it could be a sport. All of those things are fair game. They're really looking to understand what the quality of the experiences you've done outside of the actual school day. Athletics or specific talents could certainly play a role. If there's things you're bringing to the table that whether you're a fine artist, you're an athlete, you have some cool experiences that are worth sharing within an application. Legacy or kind of a connection to one's school within one's family could be a factor that's kind of been downplayed over the recent years. So that's probably less important than it was in the past. But that could be something that could be considered. Any sort of unique aspect of your application, again, maybe where you're from or just different aspects about you, can certainly be part of the puzzle. The next bullet is called institutional goals. So sometimes colleges have priorities in terms of admitting more male students or female students or students from the Midwest or students from a certain state. Those are all different priorities based on the enrollment figures of a school, and those will fluctuate year to year based on the current enrollment projections, and also the admission plan you choose, which we'll talk about. So in terms of how are you applying to that school during the different plans.
Great segue. So we're going to move in and talk about admissions plans and the application process now. So in terms of admissions plans, this is one of the areas that have gotten a little more confusing over the years. There are a series of different admissions plans that are out there, and not every school offers every admissions plan. So we want to kind of delineate the differences between these and why you would pick one over another. So some schools out there offer something called an early decision plan. This one's a big deal. It's usually the more selective private schools that offer this. So locally, like Northwestern, UChicago, they both have early decision plans. This is a binding agreement that you are making up front with a school. You are deciding early. That's how I always kind of phrase it. You're telling the school up front, if I'm a student applying using an ED plan, if you admit me, I have decided early, I'm attending your school, I will immediately turn around and cancel all of my other applications, and you usually need to do so in a very short window, like 48 hours, and I'm committing to your school. There are benefits to the early decision plan. The early decision plan tends to be a smaller pool. It's still very competitive pool, but it's a smaller pool. It also, they admit a higher percentage of that pool than they often do in the regular pool, which is usually the other pool they might offer. And some of these schools of late are bringing in a substantial portion of their freshman class through this round. So we know from WashU, from Johns Hopkins, they're talking about 60% of their freshman class is coming through an early decision round. The drawbacks on the round and using this plan is that you can't compare your financial aid offers. So you don't, as a student and as a family, get to hear back from all your schools and the costs and determine what school makes the most sense. You also can't find out your admissions decisions anywhere else, right? Because you're committing to that school. U of I wants you to cancel so they can give that spot to someone else who could actually use it. So there's drawbacks to it, but there's also advantages to it. We'd also would tell a student never ever apply early decision unless you have seen the school. We want you to see this, the college itself. We want you to see the surrounding area, and that's an area that you're comfortable with, and the student culture too. There's another plan out there that is really confusing. It's called restrictive early action, sometimes called single choice early action. There's only a handful of colleges out there that offer it. They tend to be some of the Ivy League, Stanford, Notre Dame. It tends to be the most common ones that offer this plan. It is the most confusing plan to explain because each school can have their own version of it too. If your family runs into this, we're happy to sit down and help you kind of understand the logistics. But essentially what it does is it restricts you from applying to other schools in certain rounds. So let's say you apply to Harvard using REA. REA is not binding. So you can tell Harvard, no, thank you, if you've been admitted. Thanks very much for your admissions offer. I'm going somewhere else. But they don't let you apply anywhere using an early decision plan. So if you go REA to Harvard, you're not allowed to go early decision to Northwestern. They also might restrict the following round called early action. Harvard will tell you you can apply to any public early action. That's not a problem. It's not their competitors. You can apply early action to any school that's private that offers scholarship money tied to that round. But any other school that's private that doesn't offer scholarship money in the A round, you can't apply to. So to give you an example, at Harvard, you could apply early action to University of Southern California. They have scholarship money tied to the EA round, but you cannot apply to MIT EA. They don't have scholarship money tied to that. It's a confusing plan. So if you get to it and you need help, we can help you sort it out. Early action is what everybody should be using. Early action is an earlier deadline. It is when schools have their most amount of spots to give out. It is also usually when scholarship money is tied. Ohio State will tell you if you are 1 minute past our early action deadline, you're no longer in running for any of our scholarship money. So it is very important to be using the early action at all public schools. Any school that offers it, you should be using it unless you're in violation of that REA. Regular is later in the cycle. So Northwestern offers early decision and regular. So if you're not applying early decision, you're using the regular round. U of I offers early action and regular. No one should be applying to U of I regular. Everybody should be doing it early action. And then rolling is like Iowa, where you apply and within a few weeks, maybe even a few days, you'll find out if you were admitted, and they just roll out decisions throughout the admission cycle. Students should be in the application process looking at the school's websites to see what they need. This, if you can help us, this is the biggest step we want students to learn how to do. They think we know and have it all memorized. Ms. Hanson, does such and such school require a letter of rec? I'm not entirely sure. Let's go look at the school's website. All of the schools will have a checklist of what is required to make their application complete. This is where you can find out if a school wants a letter of rec. U of I on the left, it was too big and ugly to be able to put on a nice little screenshot, so I typed it down for you. They look at your essays, your majors, your courses and grades, and test scores if provided. They're test optional. Madison's in the middle. They have an admission, their application, they have a fee, they have a couple of essays, they want you to talk about your course and grade information, they have one required letter, and the TOEFL, IELTS, and DET scores. That one's a new one for me, Mr. Miller, for English language proficiency, if you're not an English-speaking student in the past 3 years at the school. And then Northwestern, again, standardized test scores, letters of rec, a personal statement, an activity chart. There's some interviews that could be part of this. They talk about the decision plans, additional materials for certain applications, special circumstances, and then a couple of the things in that process too. So it's important to go directly to these schools' websites to see exactly what is going to be required of me in this process. I still me, right? Okay, so I didn't realize where I was going to be stopping here. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline of applying, because you heard us talk a lot about these different decisions. We try really hard to simplify this process for your students, and we'll hit this all again in August, but we have a lot of families starting to ask us this, like, when do we apply? What does this look like? So first off, we tell families at this point, students should not be writing an essays. They shouldn't be working anything on the application. Wait until summer. Wait till junior years or junior year's over. Over the summer, working on essays essays really is the most advantageous. Don't worry about completing the minutia of the Common App. We'll get into that with them in August. But when you look at the deadlines, anything that has the word early in it or anything that is public, we would recommend that all of their part is done by October 15th. This usually works them about 2 weeks ahead of the deadline. What we will tell them, and we'll remind you guys in the fall, is that literally there are hundreds of thousands and millions of students across the world trying to hit submit in the Common App all at the same time. And when they do, it inevitably crashes that last week at certain points, and it's the most detrimental point for your student. So we tell our students if they work about 2 weeks ahead of time, they'll be out of the mess and the chaos that happens in those 2 weeks, and they'll know that everything got there in time. All public apps should be done at this point. Anything the word early in it. It's extremely crucial for our public schools like U of I, UMich, Ohio State, Indiana. It is the best consideration for admission and scholarship money, and everything that they have control over should be submitted. Our teachers get all the way up to the deadline, and that's okay. Their system does not crash like the students do. The second deadline, and we only give them 2, that we heavily recommend in this process is anything that is regular, so like maybe a Northwestern that you're doing, and private, we would tell you the end of November. You will find that some of these deadlines are in January. We really like our students to be able to spend the month of December to unplug, focus on their final experiences, and not be sweating things over winter break, especially when we're not here to help as well.
Okay, we made it to bullet 3. You guys are doing great. Hanging in there. Okay, so we've talked about how colleges admit students. We've talked about the admission plans. Now we thought it was relevant to talk about the financial aspect of it. We recognize that money might be something that you might be considering. It might be an aspect that you're thinking about, which is completely understandable. College is expensive. So we really encourage families. One of the reasons we require at least one parent or guardian in our family meetings is because that sometimes is once in a while, the first conversation families actually have with each other about the financial aspects of higher education. We recognize that sometimes these are tricky conversations to have. Whether it's the income of the family or the assets, or whether there's a common understanding of what the family budget is for a college education. So we encourage that conversation to happen, hopefully now if it hasn't, and to happen regularly, because we often find that when we work with seniors, sometimes in the spring of senior year, we often get a lot of families this time of year who will come to us and kind of jokingly say like, hey, where is that? We sort of joke, this magical scholarship drawer. What can I sort of access in the spring of senior year? And unfortunately, that drawer doesn't really exist for us, right? Metaphorically or literally. And we encourage families to kind of be proactive in planning and thinking about, well, what are the expectations as a family about what you can afford, what do you want versus what you need, what is your willingness to pay, what is the government's forms that we'll share with you in a moment, what do they say about your family's financial situation? So we want you to kind of think through that. Fortunately, there are a lot of really good resources for you. There's a net price calculator, which is actually a requirement by the federal government on every college's financial aid website. It gives you some type of calculator to kind of guesstimate the potential cost of attendance for a family to attend that specific school. Some calculators are pretty incredible, actually. And some colleges will tell us if you give all the right information that they're asking for, they'll get within sometimes hundreds of dollars, if not less, in terms of being right on target with what it might require. It might be the actual bill, so to speak. What's the out-of-pocket cost for your family to attend that school? We always remind families when we're meeting with them individually that we want families to consider both public and private schools. Sometimes public schools get the better reputation of they're going to be less expensive, but that's not always the case necessarily. There's even public schools out of state that could offer some good merit scholarship money that might make it less expensive than even our in-state partnering institutions. There also could be private schools all over the country or even outside the country that could cost less money than a public school in our state. So it's good to kind of think of all the options because sometimes private schools can cost less. One related opportunity to helping pay for the cost of college, and this isn't directly a college scholarship, but of course, in terms of anything in the armed services, certainly direct enlistment is part of that mix. So we just want to share that as one of the opportunities for getting involved with anything armed services related. The first couple bullets are similar in nature. The Army Reserves or the Army National Guard or Illinois National Guard or Air Force National Guard are kind of part-time military experiences during college that help pay for college for students. So there's some weekend training requirements. College is happening concurrently, but these types of opportunities provide pretty significant funding, if not a full grant or pay the full cost for one's college tuition, which is pretty incredible. ROTC is a little bit different of an experience where students can potentially earn a scholarship the first couple years to kind of get formative practice if they're interested in actually enlisting as an officer at the end of their second year. So they might get a scholarship and they're required to be involved on a regular basis, not every day, but certainly every week for sure. And then after those 2 years, they really kind of fully commit into kind of going through that officer training after they graduate and enlisting in the military, or they can kind of step away from the scholarship and that experience and kind of just sort of no strings attached, kind of walk away from the military opportunity that ROTC provided. But it's a really cool experience. The military academy, however, is a very different experience, much more intense, full-time experience, much more selective, but it pays for the full cost of attendance for the 4 years a student is in college. So there's only a couple military academies, and if a student is admitted and enrolls, there is no cost to the family because it's a pretty substantial several $100,000 award that fully pays for all of the college expenses. Scholarships, we hope that's something that's on the minds of everybody because we think it's important to look out for the money. We kind of gravitate sometimes towards recommending schools that tend to offer more generous merit-based scholarships. There's a couple databases that we just wanted to remind families to begin maybe looking at, maybe starting this summer. You know, I always tell families wait till the current senior class has graduated most of the time, unless a scholarship is specifically earmarked for the class of 2026. For you guys as juniors, I would not recommend applying. It's a couple months too early, but soon it will be time for where scholarships start to roll over. So the websites and the databases we like are called FastWeb or Adlai.com. So those could be scholarships to register with. We regularly get scholarships that we kind of look at, make sure they're legitimate. We put some information within Naviance. There's a whole scholarship section in Naviance, and we're updating it on a pretty regular basis, our office. So we encourage families to look at Naviance scholarships, and you can do that even today, just to get a sense of what current scholarships are published from our team in Naviance for seniors. When we hear of scholarships, we'll routinely also publish blurbs about those scholarships in the Daily Digest. So if you haven't already registered, and hopefully you're already registered with the Daily Digest, you'll see a lot of scholarships coming from our office periodically throughout next year. We always tell seniors, so this is good to know as a rising senior for you guys as juniors, just check into your community. So as you guys are going about your day-to-day business, if you're getting a snack somewhere, you're at the library, you're at a business, look at a bulletin board, ask a staff member, are there scholarships for me as a senior based on certain qualifications? Sometimes those conversations can lead to kind of pulling out a scholarship application or kind of sharing an opportunity that may not be well advertised or advertised at all, frankly. So those could be kind of cool opportunities. The Stevenson Foundation is super generous in offering literally dozens of scholarships only for Stevenson seniors. That scholarship application opens in January of a student senior year. So it opened about 2 months ago or so for current seniors, and they're notified in the spring for when they have tens of thousands of dollars of various awards based on where you went to middle school, what you're looking to study, all different aspects of who you are. And we encourage you to research the schools. You know, schools have some really generous scholarship programs that are often renewable for all 4 years. So some of the scholarship programs we talked about are great scholarships, but they may be one-time award opportunities, which are, again, I'm sure always appreciated. But the college scholarships are really kind of the gold standard because those are the renewable opportunities. In terms of need-based aid, we hope that you guys are potentially thinking about applying for the free application for federal student aid this fall, or the FAFSA. The FAFSA is eligible for any student who is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, a green card holder, or an eligible non-citizen. We found out from the government about 2 months ago that the FAFSA for the class of 2026 will open on time, which is October 1st of 2025. This is really good news. The FAFSA has been a little bit delayed the last couple of years. So we're on time for this fall. We will do a financial aid night at the end of September. We'll give you that date in a moment, and we'll do a FAFSA workshop in October as well. You're going to be completing the 2026-27 FAFSA, and the reason it's called that is because the FAFSA is currently online. So if you go home and try to even like get a heads up and start to fill it out, it's actually the wrong FAFSA. Your FAFSA for the class of 2026 opens October 1st because you guys are starting college in the year 2026. It's an annual process as well. So if you end up getting need-based financial aid, which again we'll cover in much greater depth in the fall at our financial aid night, you'll then have to refill it out and kind of make sure those numbers look accurate with the college you're attending. The CSS profile is a much more detailed analysis of a family's financial situation. It's only used by a couple hundred colleges, typically the more selective and typically the more expensive schools, where they can really get into the nitty-gritty details of where's the money coming in and really where's it going. The example that I always share is they're looking at very specific line items in your family's budget, like your weekly receipt to Mariano's or Jewel. They want to know, like, where are you spending actual money to kind of figure out, well, how can we maximize a financial aid package? So that's the CSS profile. The non-custodial form may also be required if there's a sort of a divorced family situation in your house. And we'll give you those dates with those programs in a couple slides.
So we're going to move on and talk a little more about building the list, which again, we hit at the very beginning of November when we did our first night. But moving forward, how are you building your list in this process? So first off, we really want students and families to focus on the fit. We hit a lot in the first semester that we did this, that it's not about the question, is this a good school? We hear that all the time. We always challenge you to put your student's name after it. Is this a good school for Sally, for John, for whatever the name is, right? And that really shifts the focus of what you're looking for at the school. We talk about fit in several ways. Academically, does it have the majors and the outcomes and the opportunities you're looking for? Personal, social, emotionally, which I a lot of times lump those together, and that's often told when you can see the school and the surrounding area and the culture. And then financially too, we want to make sure that students and families aren't going in exorbitant debt, that the college is a good fit for their family financially. The categories that we talked about in the fall, and again, just a reminder, are these three categories. You want schools that we call safety or likely schools, schools that we call target and matches, and schools that are unpredictable. I hate using the word reaches. It is simply schools that have so many well-qualified applicants that we don't see consistency in who they are admitting. You do the same thing for costs. And ideally by August, students have about 5 to 10 schools total, not in each category, total, that deserve them, that deserves their energy and their time and your money in the process, right? Every year we see students get really focused on those unpredictable schools. And we tell students you have to temper how many you're putting into that bucket. Some of these schools have 7 essays each. If all of a sudden you're putting 10 in there, that is a lot of essays you're personalizing and you're not doing your apps well. So we definitely want to make sure that you are keeping it to a reasonable number. Students that get really focused on those unpredictable schools, we can see that count rise up. I would tell you at max 15, but really 5 to 10 is kind of that good place to manage it, making sure you have some in all 3 categories. We don't give you a set guidance for how many in each. Kind of as a magic of the family. Do you need 8 safeties? Probably don't, right? 2 or 3, if you're feeling really comfortable with those, are plenty. But you need to make sure you have more than 1 or 2 in the safety targets. And that's usually where students are at that point where we need to help round out that list. How to gauge admission likelihood. Again, going into Naviance, I wish every family could go and do this tonight. Your students have access. Parents, you don't have a login, even though it asks for a registration code. Your site doesn't give you as much information. So we encourage you to sit down with your students' login to look at this. And you'll see these scattergrams when you pull up a school. I think this one is, oh yes, it is Illinois State. Your student, if they have a test score, shows up as a blue dot. If not, you can guess. Its test scores and GPA are on the range. And if you're in a sea of green, we call it a safety. This is a very unemotional way to kind of to figure out which bucket your school belongs in. If you're in a school like this is Ohio State. There's some red outlying X's that could be students that applied regular, not early. It could be a portfolio-based or audition-based, but this student's pretty much in green. We would call it a target. And then this one's University of Michigan. This one's a mess, right? Everybody in front of me, that is an unpredictable school. You could have every AP under the sun and straight A's and the highest test scores, and we would still call it unpredictable. Anything that falls below a 25% emit rate is in that bucket. And Michigan is usually hovering around a 23% emit rate, if that gives you why we throw that 25 as a threshold. A reminder that most schools are not highly selective and also still prepare students for life. And we really sometimes get lost in the more expensive, more selective must mean better outcomes. It doesn't, and we really challenge that thought process in our offices. We want you to spend as much time looking at safeties and targets as you do at the more unpredictable schools for you. Again, our juniors are really great at finding those unpredictables. We want to make sure that you have a list that also includes safeties and targets. Every application should be an application the student is excited about, even in those safeties and targets. Our heart drops. We get seniors every February that come to us upset and stressed. Everywhere they applied was in that unpredictable bucket. They're getting back deferrals or denies, which means if it's a deferral, they're not getting a decision until really this next week. Everyone around them is buzzing about acceptances and depositing, and they have this one school that they never thought was really going to be the one, and they don't want to go there. And they come to us in February and say, oh, I have to add more schools to my list. And we have to break the news that we're past really almost all the deadlines, and anyone that we would add in now falls in the unpredictable because they've handed out all their spots. So we want to make sure they're excited about all their schools. And then again, as we mentioned, college ranking does not equal student success. Please don't intermix those. And then be optimistic and realistic and diversify the list.
Last bullet, we're almost there. All right, so some timeline and resources for you. So how do you do research? We hope that you're developing a list of questions for you guys as students, as a family, of things that are important. You're looking for information about a certain major, about a certain environment, certain culture or student life, whatever the case might be. We hope that as you're learning about schools, you're developing questions to learn more and to kind of ask schools that are on your radar similar questions to kind of compare and contrast the various opportunities inside and outside the classroom. There's a lot of really good search tools. We just showed Naviance pretty briefly. We also really like the College Board site. It's called Big Future. It has a really cool advanced college search feature that also exists in Naviance, but also is one that's pretty similar that we also think is a great tool to kind of play around with. We have our website. We try to continuously update our website with content, with resources, with information on pretty much a daily basis, sometimes it feels like. But we also, and we'll share this too, but we also have a YouTube page where we upload some videos as well with some of our programming. But the college's websites are probably your go-to resource, right? If school, when, to Ms. Hanson's earlier point, when students ask us, tell us about this rule or this policy at the school, we'll always go to the website, at least just to double check that our information, our knowledge is accurate, right? Sometimes we're like, oh, that's my memory, it's a little fuzzy. Let me just go back and make sure I have that exactly down pat before I tell you this is the way to kind of move forward. There's a lot of good resources in the community. So there's college fairs that we promote in the suburbs. There's some national college fairs in the fall that will be in Chicago and also in Milwaukee, where literally hundreds of schools will be behind a little booth kind of in a bigger space, whether it's Navy Pier or McCormick Place, and to kind of give you guys information and resources about all the different opportunities. And then the college rep visit. So if you guys as a junior, or if you're a student, did not join us in the College Career Center this past fall, kind of September, October time period, when literally 150 different college reps from around the world visited with us, that's a really good opportunity to kind of get updates from the schools, hear insider tips about the application process. We'll be in those visits as well, taking notes, and we publish those notes in the counselor notes section within Naviance. We also encourage you to talk to people. So talk to people at school, talk to your family, your friends, talk to your teachers. They all went to college. Ask them where they went. Ask them about their experiences. They might be a little bit dated, but they'll tell you stories. I'm sure you're gonna get really good information, but go to sources of information about opportunities academically, about student life, so that you can get a broader understanding of what kind of colleges might be all about. So we have a little bit of homework for you. So this is our night 2. We're doing kind of a night 3, we're calling it this year. We're sort of reframing our programming. So by August, we hope, as Ms. Hanshin shared earlier, that you're in the next really 5 months or so before we meet with you guys again for the night 3, kind of the second or third week of school, that you're developing kind of a short list of schools, that you're thinking of the 5 to 10 schools that you're really interested in, that will deserve your application, that you have found to be a potentially good fit for various reasons, whether it's academically or financially or location or personal reasons, whatever those reasons might be. We hope you start working on those essays. Again, that college essay workshop class could be a really good resource to begin kind of getting that head start on brainstorming topics and getting some general feedback from peers and your teacher. We encourage you to look at the requirements we showed earlier. So looking, what do the colleges actually require? Before you run off to your counselor's office tomorrow, and please don't, or your teachers and say, hey, I need you to write me a letter of recommendation. Maybe first check to see if your schools even require it. Your schools may not require one. You may not actually need a letter from either your counselor or your teachers. We want you to have a personal email address you're going to be using when you apply. This is a little bit of a heads up to the fall, but we want you to use a non-Stevenson email address when you get to the actual application process, because after you graduate, your Stevenson email won't be functional anymore, unfortunately. So you're going to want to use that personal email to communicate with colleges. We also have an organizational system sheet on our website, also in the College Career Center, that we recommend using just to stay organized with all this information, whether it be passwords to the admission portals or the various requirements that are just hard to remember across just 5 to 10 schools. Writing it down and keeping track of that, whether it's on paper or digitally, will help you guys stay very organized. And that's a good idea. We talked about the recommenders piece and opportunities to continue talking as a family. As Ms. Hanshin shared earlier, we gave you opportunities in the fall to kind of talk together during this program. We hope that this program provides motivation to continue those important family conversations and to kind of schedule times here and there to like check in, whether it's Sunday night dinner or Wednesday nights. We're going to sit down and chat for 20 minutes about what are you researching? What are you looking for? These are good ways to kind of connect and make sure you guys are on the same page about this whole process. And we want you to guys, as parents and guardians, and you guys as students, to kind of begin this adulting process, right? If you think about it, in a little less than a year and a half, you might be heading off to a college campus where you might be dependent on yourself to set that alarm, to go to class, to take care of yourself, the basic kind of needs like laundry. So if you haven't tried things like that, this is a good time to kind of begin that process a little bit and encourage your students to like try that and see how it goes and provide that feedback if it's not going so well. Our night 3 is on Monday, August 25th. So we'll remind you of that date. It's like the 3rd week of school or something like that, but we'll hope to see you guys there for the next step. So that's our senior family night. It'll be right here, this room. So hope to see you guys in this space. We're doing that financial aid night in the Performing Arts Center on September 25th, a month later. A couple weeks past that, we'll begin our first generation to U.S. undergraduate admission programming. So we're going to do 4 programs next year as we did this year. We'll do 1 in October, 1 in November, and then 2 more in the second semester. The October 15th evening is our FAFSA Alternative Illinois Aid Forum Workshop, where if you guys as a family are looking for some support to sit down and go over the FAFSA or the Alternative Illinois Aid Forum. If you're not eligible for the FAFSA, we can sit down with you and give you some feedback to questions. And then at the end of the first semester, we've been doing this for a couple of years. We call it Preparing for Admissions Decisions and the Next Steps. It's an opportunity to give you guys resources on kind of receiving admission decisions and kind of how to process that as a family and how to kind of make some plans after you hopefully get admitted. For you guys as juniors, we're actually going to be seeing you super soon. You may not know this yet. Your teachers will share with you, or if they haven't already, very soon, that you're going to be coming to the College Career Center right after spring break during your math class, one of the days right after break, to kind of do a little special program with us. So stay tuned on some cool information where we're going to give you some cool information about college. We're going to meet with you in the fall. That senior family night will be a similar presentation to what we offer you guys as students during the school day. And then we're going to have kind of a schedule that we'll establish in the fall for lots of application workshops. So we're going to have applications before school, during 8th period, times you're available to talk about essays, to talk about the Common Application, to talk about the University of Illinois application, the University of California application. We'll hopefully have an interview panel as well. And then every Tuesday morning, we're going to have what's called Drop-In Tuesdays in the College Career Center, where students can literally drop in without an appointment and just kind of ask us questions. We'll have lots of counselors available to talk with you. That's pretty much what we've got for you this evening. We hope sincerely that this was a helpful program. We've never done our junior night in this way, where we've done it in 2 evenings. This is the first year. So we'd love your feedback. So we have truly, and I know people say this in presentations, we don't like long surveys either. It's a very short survey. So if you have any thoughts, please scan the QR code. We appreciate it.
And we would so appreciate it because last week we did a sophomore night and we had 2 people complete the survey. So we just assume we must be excellent and that's why nobody's saying anything. But this really is, we don't usually do this night. We usually only do the fall for the junior night. So especially if you've done both series, we'd love to know kind of your thoughts, but please take a moment to complete our survey.
Yeah, we thank you guys for joining us. We view this as a partnership and we are honored to have our jobs. We love our jobs. We hope that that's evident. We love working with our families and supporting you guys in this journey. And it is one. It's a process over the next year plus. And we're on the tail end of it with seniors. And we're hoping that if we haven't met with you, we will continue to connect with you either this spring or certainly in the fall when we get into the kind of the peak of applying for college.
Thank you guys so much.
Have a great night. Get home safely.
If you guys want to talk to us, you can come on up to the stage and ask some questions.